Chapter 1. Trespassing. 10 years later. Moll woke with a start. Her eyes wide, her body drenched in sweat. She spun round on her hands and knees, her bed, her wagon, the camp gone. She was alone in the forest with the darkness, and it swirled around her like misted ink. Heart thudding, she waited for her eyes to adjust. Brambles twisted up around her, closing over her head, curling round her back. Moll tensed. To get inside the bramble tunnel, where the forest was knotted and wild, she must have run past the sacred oaks, climbed over the sprawling creepers, then crawled through the undergrowth. Not difficult for Moll usually, but her heart raced faster as she realized she had made this journey in her sleep. She scrambled back down the prickly tunnel, away from the darkness, away from where the nightmare had taken her. Brambles tore at her skin, and thorns sank into her bare feet, but she struggled on. The nightmare, the one that came for her every night with the drum and the rattle and the masked figures, was growing stronger. It had pulled her out of bed before now, but Oak, the head of the camp, had always found her, always brought her home, until tonight. A bramble snagged Moll's long dark hair and yanked her backwards. She twisted free and blundered on. "It's over," she panted into the night. "The nightmare's not real." But the sound of the drum and the rattle was still pulsing inside her, roaring like an untamed animal. She burst out of the tunnel, gasping for air, her feet scored with cuts. The forest around her was still, a tangle of moonlit trees. Barely drawing breath, Moll bounded over the creepers and darted between the ferns, back towards the safety of her camp. And then a shiver crept down her spine as she remembered. She stopped suddenly. On any other night, she would have been safe there, but tonight was different. How could she have fallen asleep? Tonight was the night she had planned to break her promise to Oak, and that meant safe was the last thing she'd be. She snatched a glance around her, beating back her fear. Somehow her nightmare had lured her from the camp without waking the watch, and now she was exactly where she wanted to be. Just moments from the river boundary, she promised Oak she would never cross. Moll hugged her cotton nightdress to her. She wouldn't be beaten by the nightmare, by something that wasn't even real. She ducked beneath a yew tree and gave the trunk a sharp punch. "I'm needing protection tonight, tree spirit, and a bit of that pig-headedness Oak says is bubbling away inside of me. None of this falling asleep and wandering off into brambles or who knows what. I've got a plan to carry out. You hear me?" The breeze shifted through the ivy, brushing Moll's skin like a whisper. Taking a deep breath, she turned and ran, back towards the river. And that's when she heard it. A noise threading through the trees towards her, a low, rolling sound only meters away, like an engine throbbing deep in the bowels of the earth. Boo. A smile flickered across Moll's face. She wasn't alone now. "Griff," she panted, leaping over a tree stump and squinting into the undergrowth. She couldn't see anything, but she knew he was there, racing along just meters from her, silently like a faster, stronger shadow. Then she spotted him, springing out behind the cluster of alder trees that lined the banks of the river. Griff was large, even for a wildcat, with a muscular body and long banded legs. His coat was thick and grey with jet black stripes, and his long tail and bushy, ringed with perfect bands of black and ending in a blunt tip. Mole skidded to a halt before him, gasping for breath. She crouched down, level with Griff, and gazed into his eyes. They were yellowish green and large, like her own, but with vertical pupils. Wild pupils. "It's all right, Griff. It's all right." Griff's hackles rose and he arched his back. Urgh. He was so close to Mole the growl felt like it rumbled inside her body. She fiddled with a stick by her foot, then looked up. "I'm crossing that river, Griff. Skull's camp have been raiding our clearing for too long. They've taken chickens, dogs, firewood, and now they've gone and thieved a horse. Not any old horse. They've stolen Jinx, my cob." Griff didn't move, didn't even blink. Mole wanted to reach out and touch him, to stroke his thick, soft fur. But there were rules, even in the wild, and she wasn't about to go breaking them. Never touch a wildcat. They're only animals that can't be tamed, Oak had told her when Griff first appeared at the camp. No one knew where he'd come from. The wildcat just showed up one day, as animals sometimes did. Oak had said there were no wildcats left in the southern part of the country. But he was wrong. Griff had showed himself to Mole first, out of everyone in the camp, and not even the elders could explain that bond that had grown between them over the years. It was with Mole that Griff ran through the forest, and it was with Mole that he seemed to trust and understand. No one else. "He probably doesn't feel threatened by you, because you're so small. Not much bigger than him, really," her best friend Siddy had said. But Mole didn't think it was that. Not really. She tossed her waist-length hair over her shoulder and huffed impatiently. Griff flinched, backing away several steps. Mole dipped her head, an apology for the sudden movement. Communication with Griff had been slow, measured and calm. Everything Mole was not. She rested her elbows on her knees and looked deep into Griff's eyes. "The ancient wood here belongs to us. Skull's camp aren't frightening us away by thieving, and I'm going to let them know it. They've got the deep wood, and that's where they should stay." She looked towards the river, and her face darkened. "And besides, this'll show them back at camp that I'm no half-gypsy." Mole narrowed her green eyes that were almost the same colour as Griff's, but that marked her out as different from the rest of the dark-eyed gypsies in the camp, and had earned her snide comments in the past that she'd never forget. "This'll show them," she muttered. Griff didn't move, but his claws sprang out from beneath him and sliced into the earth. "Don't go," he seemed to say. "The deep wood's not safe." Tanglefern Forest was vast, with some trees so old and tangled that few had passed beneath their branches. But there were places you went and places you didn't. The ancient wood in the north of the forest was safe. There was the glade of brilliant spring bluebells and yews beyond Oak's camp, then a grove of crabapple trees, and beyond that, after the forests, the farm itself and Tippleberry village. But south, well south, was another place altogether, so she'd heard. The deep wood was rumoured to be full of shady trees and rotting undergrowth, and, when it ended, the heathland, with its stinking bogs and soggy marshes. But south was where Mole had to go if she wanted to get Jinx back. Griff was growling now, his warning deep and throaty. Mole scrunched up her nose and hurried to the river bank. Only yesterday, Oak had said that one day he'd get his revenge on Skull. Well, to Mole, that was a sign, possibly even an order, for her to cross the boundary and make things right as quickly as possible. She grabbed the catapult she'd hidden in the hollow of the alder tree the day before, then clutched the chain around her neck. Every person in the camp had a different talisman to bring them luck, and hanging from Mole's chain were 2 boxing fists joined at the wrist. Her initials had been engraved on them, MP, Molly Pecksniff. She gripped them tightly, for further protection against evil spirits and bad luck, then slipped into the gurgling river. The cold nipped at her ankles, but she stooped to pick up a pebble. No point carrying a catapult if she didn't have a stone. Ah! Griff was behind her on the riverbank, bracing and stamping his forelegs, and he was spitting now, which was never a good sign. It's rude to spit, Griff, Mole said. I don't go spitting at you when you're hunting in the dead of night. Griff cocked his head, considering. Then he hissed and spat again. Mole clung to a branch for support, then she edged further into the river. The stones beneath her feet were slippery, and she stumbled forward. She whispered a quick prayer to the water spirit who she'd heard could twist up whirlpools and conjure rapids against those who stomped in her river for no good reason. Then Mole carried on, bracing her legs against the current, feeling a path through the stones with the soles of her feet. She looked up. She was nearing the banks of the deep wood now, closer to Skull's camp than she'd ever been. Fumbling for her catapult and swallowing back the thud of her heart, she waded on.